Hey everyone, welcome to Indie Film Grit, a podcast about indie films and indie filmmakers. I am your host, Timothy Patrick, but you can call me Tim. Today's podcast is a good one, an important one. We talk about something that you really need to keep in mind when you're making an indie film. What am I talking about? I'm talking about sound. And joining me today is Taiwo Heard. He does sound for indie films all the time. He knows what he's talking about. Let's get into it. All right, well, here we are with my guest, Taiwo Heard. Tai, thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
Definitely, anytime.
Indie Film Grit.
That's right. Now, this episode's all about sound. Sound for indie film. Good sound, bad sound. You filmmakers out there are going to need to know how to do production sound, which means the guy with the boom pole or only a handful of other setups, really.
Well, actually, in indie filmmaking, which I'm heavily involved in, I'm actually usually the boom guy and I'm the sound recordist. But in the larger productions, those are two separate jobs. And There could be several boom people. And the guy that's recording everything is sitting down somewhere with a fan on him. Just maxing, relaxing. Just
listening with the headphones.
I know, just drinking Kool-Aid and probably smoking Camel Lights.
But when you're doing that job on an indie film and you're holding the boom.
Oh, yeah, it's a workout, first of all.
Yeah.
And second of all, you just have a lot to stay on top of.
Yeah, a lot to think about in that moment. You know,
Right.
You got to make sure the boom's out of the shot. You got to make sure the levels are right.
Right.
So you're constantly glancing down at what, your hip?
I'm constantly glancing down at my hip, yes.
Because you have a recorder down there?
That's where the recorder is. I usually have it tilted up so I can see the levels.
Right.
But then once I get a feel for it, I go completely by ear.
Right.
It helps if you actually watch the rehearsals. Whatever they do in rehearsals, they're going to do it 10 times bigger when the cameras are rolling. So just take that into effect. So if there's a little bit of an outburst during rehearsals, then just expect it to be huge when the cameras are rolling. So and be ready to back that mic off or do what you have to do. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not always riding the knobs, right? It's distance.
Right.
So you make sure you don't peek out.
Yeah. And if I'm kind of iffy about it, I've got a setting on my Zoom where you can record the same audio signal 10 dB down. So if you've got a signal that's all over the place and you want to make sure that you've got some backup if it peaks, then,
Sound is such a big part of film that it can make you cry, it can make you angry, it could raise your heart rate. Tell us about that when you're sound designing an indie film.
Oh yeah, well, it is not all about the visuals, but the visuals are what inspires the sound.
Right.
Always. And I mean, usually the director has some kind of vision for it. But you know what? Actually, about half the time, some of the indie directors I work with don't have a vision for the sound. And that's a problem in and of itself. And then you're just completely dependent on getting a good sound guy that's gonna care enough to get you a good sound, like me. But you might end up with some schmuck, and then you'll have crappy sound. So you want to know your stuff, so you at least can keep an eye on how things are sounding, if the levels are even.
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with working with a sound person.
But this day and age, you'd have to admit that production sound for an indie film is easier and more accessible than it ever has been.
Well, yeah, the tools are there. The H4n is not that expensive. You can record on anything. You could record onto your laptop.
Right.
But, if you take certain precautions in treating the area that you're in and just making sure, little things like just shutting a window just gives some thought to the sound of the environment that you're recording in, and
Right.
it'll increase the quality of your movies by 20%. So just make sure all the windows are shut. Try to turn off the refrigerator. If there's a plane flying through your take, that might be a problem later.
Speak up. Let the director know.
That's right. Speak up. Let the director know. They'll do another take. They should appreciate it.
Yeah, I would. I definitely would.
Yeah.
You want that thumbs up from your sound guy.
Yeah.
So Tai, for the indie filmmaker who needs the bare bones setup to capture quality audio for their indie film, what do you recommend?
As long as you can override the auto volume on your camera, you can actually record directly into your camera. You can either use a shotgun mic mounted on top if you're close enough. You're going to get pretty good audio close up. But more medium shot, you're going to want a boom. You're going to want to get in there with a boom. Keep the boom out of the shot, of course. If you're further away, you're going to need some kind of lav setup, like with a wireless unit and mics that are pinned onto the actors. So look that up online, wireless lavs. They can be a little pricey, but you can rent them.
The good ones are pricey. The good ones are too pricey.
Way too pricey.
If you get inexpensive ones, like a lot of indie filmmakers do, they will work, but not always.
That's right. They can be completely unreliable. They can cut in and out. They can be susceptible to interference from airports, radio stations.
Let's get into sound design, because this is where you really dive in.
Oh yeah, this is more my thing for sure.
Yeah.
Well, sound design is what I like to do best in the film world, and it's a broad area, broader than most people know it. It goes for everything from foley as a type of sound design. When you're making the sounds yourself, that's a type of sound design. And it's everything from that to using libraries. As an indie filmmaker, you're going to be using libraries a lot because, who's got a foley pit? Like, I don't have a foley pit.
Right.
It's ridiculous. They expect you to, those things have to be, like the cement's got to be poured all the way down to like close to the bedrock.
I don't know much about a foley pit. I have seen,
super
videos.
Super expensive to make.
Right. And there's puddles and there's boots and there's broken glass. It's a messy setup.
But it's a messy setup, and in order to get it to sound right, the cement that everything's sitting on has to be poured all the way down close to the foundation, and that it makes it sound more realistic or something. I don't know. So
what you're saying, and I agree with you, is you do not recommend the indie filmmaker grabbing a pair of boots and trying to match it to their character walking down the street.
No, it would take forever and it would sound bad. You get a library of footsteps, you chop it up, and then you just advance the film forward until you see that footfall hit. The key is to find out where the footfall is and then put a footstep sound right in there. And if it doesn't sound right, when you just, move it back and forth until it seems natural, till the heel hits when it's supposed to and the toe hits when it's supposed to.
And sometimes you maybe slow it down. Sometimes maybe you mess with the pitch.
Right, especially if you've got a limited amount of footsteps. If you have to use the same footsteps for two different people, you're gonna want to like pitch it up or pitch it down or something. So
even within the same walk of the one character, every footstep can't sound the same. They never do.
oh yeah. So what you do, what I do is I get a long audio file and I chop that up. So every footfall naturally sounds different because it is different. It's a different footstep.
Right. Yeah.
But
Well, you just worked on a big project where
yeah.
where you got to experiment with sounds of all types. Tell us about that.
oh yeah, I worked on this Chinese animated feature called Water Planet. But basically it's about a kid and her dad who are on this planet, and it may or may not be Earth. And it's running out of water. The dad knows the water's gone, but he's still looking for more. And then they help this lady.
Is this the opposite of Waterworld with Kevin Costner?
You know what? I don't think I have to describe it any further.
That's
I think
it.
That's it.
It is the exact opposite. But
Did
go
they
on.
find a girl that was being chased by robots?
There was no robots. There was Dennis Hopper.
Yeah, so it's the opposite of Waterworld. And so there were robots with lasers, of course. And I cut the lasers for it, which involved a lot of layering and the manipulation of sound, running it through plugins. And it was fun because there were a lot of different types of lasers. There were robots that were shooting lasers that all sounded the same. It was a challenge when there were like 4 or 5 robots on the screen shooting to get them all to sound like separate entities instead of just one mishmash.
And it's got to sound different.
Yeah, so you want to, like, what I would do is just pitch the sounds up and down, maybe increase or decrease the speed of the lasers to just a little bit so you can differentiate.
Cool, man. That sounds like fun.
And I did the gadgets. There were a lot of gadgets, like people who had face masks that would fold onto their face, like like Iron Man or something.
Yeah. Well, you say gadget, I think of Go-Go Gadget Arms or something.
No, this is like Iron Man gadget.
Go, gadget, go.
I actually, just to get an idea of what to do, I revisited Guardians of the Galaxy. Basically, I did the sound design for like how I felt the visor should sound, and then I'm like, let me look at Star-Lord's, and I'm like, oh, that sounds wrong. But let me fix mine to sound more like that.
And that's another good tip for the indie filmmaker out there as far as sound design is
Get references. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like anything else. If you're gonna paint, look at the works of other painters.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're working off a library. Now, is this something easily accessible to the indie filmmaker?
A sound library?
Yeah. How does one go about getting a catalog of sound effects?
Well, one thing you have to be careful of is getting bad sound effects in your collection. So there are places to go to get free sound effects if you just look up free sound effects. There's new stuff and there's old stuff. You can record it yourself if you're, savvy enough, I guess. But
I remember getting CDs called 2000 Sound Effects.
Oh yeah.
And it had a picture of a train on there. Yeah. And it was like 3 volumes, and it was the worst. And this is like in the 90s or something. Yeah. But it was bad, but I loved it because it was the only thing.
Effects,
yeah, it was sound effects. So when all else fails, work with what you got. You can manipulate it enough.
That's true. But there are resources. If you're listening to this podcast, you can do better than that.
I agree.
Because you go to SoundSnap, they have free sounds. SoundSnap. They've got, I think all their sounds are free actually.
Really?
Maybe they've got a premium tier, but
is that user generator? Or
people are putting these sound effects up online for general public consumption.
What's a good rule of thumb as far as audio levels for music in the background?
There really aren't any rules. Actually, it just depends on the emotion you're trying to get with the scene. I remember there was this one scene in it's the Tarantino's Nazi movie, Inglourious Bastards, and where the music played so loud, it was the David Bowie song, and the woman was dressed in red, leaning against the walls, almost like I had to cover my ears in the theater. But it worked. It just, it just drove the emotion home to the point of ridiculousness, and that worked. But most of the time it wouldn't. So you just have to decide if you want the scene to be like a slow build. Just basically the build of the music has to follow the build of the scene, and where you want the scene to go. It's where the music has to end up.
Yeah.
And if there are lyrics in the music, that also can conflict with the dialogue. So that's another thing. Definitely if there are lyrics in the music that don't directly relate to what the people are saying, just keep it low. Just let people get the feel for it. Oh, it's that song. And then I'll even fade it out after the initial introduction of, let's say, some source music on the radio. Throughout the scene, just fade it down a little bit, just imperceptibly, so that it's still going, but it's not, overpowering the dialogue or the effects. So,
yeah, for the opening shot of the Booker, my buddy had a song that was perfect, and I asked him, "Do you have that? Can you give me that without the vocal track?" And it worked beautifully.
Also, if you have friends that are musicians, that's a good resource.
That's a good point. I like that. Real quick, and this is a loaded question, what makes audio bad audio?
Bad audio has extraneous noises in the background. It's got hums, clicks, pops. You want the audio to sound as if you're standing in front of the person in the room, ideally. But at the same time, you don't want too much of the room sound.
That's a good thing to bring up, the room sound, the ambiance. It's a good rule of thumb to record the dialogue first, and then when it's quiet, record the room tone.
You're right. You record room tone at the end of the takes. All the crew and the cast are all quiet. And then the dialogue editor has that to use to, paste over. Or the dialogue editor. If you're an indie filmmaker, that's you.
Right. What is the benefit of this room tone? What do you use it for?
You use it to paste over the clicks and the pops. So instead of, you could just cut the clicks and the pop out, and then you've got this unnatural silence, and then the audio comes back, and it just sounds weird and unprofessional. But if you paste in a little bit of this room tone, and you can use the same pieces over and over again because it's just basically silence or white noise, and you can just paste that in whenever there's an audio defect that you need to cover up.
That's really good advice. Always get room tone.
Always get room tone.
What are the things that people most underestimate about the sound guy?
Well, I think they might underestimate how crucial it is to communicate with the sound guy, to keep an open channel of, dialogue with the sound guy. You have to, just the director and the producers and any line producers, just they have to think about sound. They don't have to do it. They don't have to do any of the technical things, but they do have to support the sound guy. So in order for them to do their job, they have to be willing to take an extra second out to unplug the refrigerator.
Right. As compartmentalized as the film business is and making indie films, you're not in a vacuum. You need to communicate. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's gotta be a communication. There's gotta be.
Respect.
directors that just roll without even calling for sound to see if I'm ready it's just so unprofessional. I know everybody's on a schedule. I know that there's a budget, but just,
No, I hear you.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to say to the indie filmmaker out there who's thinking about going into sound?
I say find someone that does it, talk to them, and then just get them to take you out with them.
Shadow them.
Shadow them.
Mentorship.
Exactly, and that's the best way to see if you even like it, because there's like a 50.
It ain't easy.
No, it's not easy, and it's not for everybody. So there's like production sound. I'm like, I like it, but post-production sound, I love it. So you just have to find what you like and talk to people that do it. See if they're happy.
Well, I think you've given the indie filmmaker out there a lot of good tips when it comes to audio for their indie film.
Good. If there's ever anything else you want to know about it, just send me an email.
Send you an email or hit you up on Twitter. Where
at Tai Heard. Yeah, hit me up on Twitter at Tai Heard.
There you go.
And I will answer all of your audio questions.
Once again, I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's that. Taiwo Heard just gave you some sound advice. So I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Now I want to thank you guys for listening. These early podcasts may seem a little stiff, but I'm hoping to get into the groove, as they say. Go to indiefilmgrit.com, check us out, follow us on Twitter at indiefilmgrit. Subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Why not? So hopefully I'll be seeing more of you. Oh, before I go, I want to ask you guys out there something. Do you have the courage, the passion, and the perseverance to make indie films? Do you have enough indie film grit?